right now, our COO committee, is it election committee? Selection. Our selection committee has came down with one finalist, and that is Mr. Merlin Holmes. So we are here to ask some questions, introduce him to our community, and present Mr. Merlin Holmes to you all. So without further ado, Merlin, you're up.
Can you hear me okay? Yes. Is this a little better now?
Awesome.
Is it better? Okay. Well, I am a teacher at heart, and so I would rather stand and talk to people, whether it's teachers or parents or whoever, than stand behind a desk. One of the things that they asked me to start with tonight was just talk about the first 90 days and what that would look like if I become your COO. And before I do that, I just wanted to do a quick introduction. The beautiful lady sitting here on the front row is my wife, Zoanne. And I always have to tell people this when we meet because it's a little bit, they look at her and they go, oh, he married one of his former students. But she doesn't age and I do, and she is my high school sweetheart. We've been married almost 40 years. We have 5 children, a girl and 4 boys, the oldest which is 32, the youngest of which is a junior in college and he's 21, just finished his junior year. And so just wanted to do that introduction. To talk about the transition plan a little bit, the first thing, I'm probably not going to give you a lot of specifics, but it's more general ideas of how I think it should look and what the philosophy behind it is. Because I think for any successful organization like Monument Academy, that transition, first of all, it should be a smooth transition. And one of the things that I think is important for anybody in my position is not to come in and make a lot of changes without learning the organization first. And so that's going to be a big piece of the transition that I would do if we finalize this and end up working together, which obviously that's the plan. A couple of things besides that smooth transition vision. There are 3 things that I think are really important for me to learn about in that process. The first is people. I really want to come in and get to know parents, get to know the staff, and make sure I know what the strengths are of the people that are already involved in Monument Academy. We've lived here in Monument since 2003, and so I know a lot about Monument Academy, but from an observer standpoint, not from the inside. And so part of that transition will be me getting to know people more. And that process has started already somewhat with your selection committee, but that needs to go a lot deeper before we start getting into making a lot of decisions. So that people piece is very, very important. The second piece of that is the philosophy of the school. I've been involved in several schools that have very, very similar philosophy to Monument Academy. Schools that embrace core knowledge, schools that believe in a classical mode of instruction, schools where character is very, very important. But in each of those schools, and there are a number of successful schools like this around the state, each school has its own personality, has its own unique version of those philosophies. So I think it's important for me to come in and understand that, do some listening, ask a lot of good questions, make sure that I understand what's working here at Monument Academy and understand our unique particular version of the philosophy. And then third is programs. Each of the schools I've been involved with, the programming is slightly different. And Monument Academy will be that as well. So learning what programs are really serving the students and serving them well. What programs do the parents really enjoy and feel like are key components of what makes Monument Academy a success. And then there may be some programs that are high priorities to start. You're in the middle of growing into a high school program. And so part of that will be adding programs as we go forward. But we need to do that carefully and make sure that each of those programs can be successful as we continue to add things. So that's a little bit of kind of how I will approach things. Any of you ever read the book Good to Great? Okay, it's one of my favorite business books. And really a lot of what I've been talking about is very similar to what he talks about in Good to Great. In Good to Great, there's several things. He talks about people as well as being very important to an organization's success. And that the thoughts, the disciplined thought is very important as well. Well, that lines up very well with philosophy. And then the disciplined action piece that he talks about in the book is very much like, well, what programs are actually going to deliver those ideas then? So you're looking at who you have, what you're trying to accomplish, and then how you're going to accomplish that. And to me, when I think about joining an organization like Monument Academy, it's been a very, very good school for a long time. And one of the worst things that someone in my position could do is come in and make a lot of changes just to put things on a resume. And there are leaders who do that, I promise you. And I've seen them, I've worked for them. And it's a train wreck because they're not thinking about what's best for the students or what's best for the families. They're thinking about what's best for them. And one of my favorite things I read, probably the last 10 years, I read a servant leadership book about every year. And that's really part of my philosophy as well, is that to serve the community, serve the families, serve the students, serve the staff of this school. And over time then, help this organization get better. And that's the whole idea behind the Good to Great philosophy is we don't have to, tip over the apple cart just to get better. We can get better from where we are. And then hopefully over that time then, over the first 90 days, first 100 days, there'll be some things that we see and plan and can do together to work on and get better. And part of that is always, and this is part of my philosophy as well, I'm a respecter of roles and responsibilities. Part of your COO's job is to report to the board and respond to the board directives. And so that'll also be part of it. There may be things that the board feels like Monument Academy needs to get better at and move forward in. And I'll be working on those as well. All right. So should we take some questions?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Holmes, as you are aware, we have taken questions from our parents coming in, leaving cards in the basket. So these are all questions that our parents have asked. I'll start with, as a Monument area resident, how have you contributed to the Monument community?
Well, one of the things that's been interesting in our life over the last, probably since we moved here, is that I've often worked in other places. And so that has made it challenging to be involved in the Monument community itself. So I haven't been involved in city council or any of those kinds of things in our community. We're active in our church, but I haven't actually done specific things in Monument really to speak of that I could tick off and label.
You can just say that. Mr. Holmes, what plans and experience do you have for creating a sense of community and partnership within the school?
Well, one of the things that I think I have a really good track record with is creating culture within the school. I think it's very important that all the people in the community treat each other well, respect each other, and create a culture where people are valued, people are heard. One of the programs that I've used in other schools is called Capturing Kids' Hearts. And it's a program that teaches teachers primarily how to build culture in their classroom, and then how to take that culture that they're building and take it into the school. And so then one of the things we've done, and I would hope to do that here as well, is the staff to get together and create a staff social contract of how are we going to treat each other? What are the rules we were going to agree on to treat each other and handle issues within the staff? We do that. There are 4 questions that we usually ask in that process. One is, how do we want to be treated by administration? And that's always an important question that the staff wants to hear. Well, what can we expect from you? And they want to be able to talk about that. The reverse question is also asked. Well, what do you think administration wants from the staff? walk that up. And I know on your website, you have a very well thought out conflict resolution process that you have in place. And I think that's the way it should be heard. But I also think it's okay for parents to generate random ideas. And here's the other thing, though, I think, parents also want to know is that when they choose a school like Monument Academy, that it's going to stay true to the philosophy that they signed up for. And I think that's also a very important balance to that process. One of the analogies I use is, when my boys were in high school, they really wanted to take a trip to San Antonio for vacation one summer. And they're big. We were big Spurs fans because of David Robinson, one of the few NBA real role models, so I can think about it. And so they thought San Antonio would be a great place to be. So I've often used the analogy of, let's say your family was planning a vacation to San Antonio. You've got hotel reservations. You're going to go see a Spurs game. You've got SeaWorld on the agenda. You've got all these things planned. It's a great vacation. And then you get on the airplane, and 6 people from the passengers say, you know what? We all decided that we really want to go to San Diego today, not San Antonio. And they convince the captains in the cockpit that they're going to go to San Diego instead of San Antonio. Because there's also SeaWorld there, there's beaches, there's an aircraft carrier you can walk through, and I've been to San Diego. It's a great place. It's got a phenomenal zoo. There's nothing wrong with San Diego, but think how upset you'd be if you got on a plane headed for San Diego, plane headed for San Antonio, and you ended up in San Diego. And so it's part of the responsibility to balance that. I mean, parents do have concerns, and we can work through those. Parents are going to have great ideas about how we can implement the philosophy of this school and do that. And so I'm real receptive to that, but at the same time, it's the responsibility of your board first, and then your administration and teaching staff to fulfill the promises that were made to the parents when they signed up for the school. So it's kind of a balanced approach to that.
I've got a small ask of those that are here. If you're on the guest Wi-Fi, would you be able to come off of that? Obviously, Jackie, we understand you need to be on there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that'll help.
All right, Mr. Holmes, what are your intentions in regard to parents who strongly disagree with the mandates coming down from both the district and the state? How will you support those of us who gather and speak up?
Well, I've said numerous times over the last few months that the COVID pandemic has been the hardest thing to manage of my entire education career. And I've got the gray hairs to prove that I've been at this for a while. It's been a pain. It really has been difficult. Because, I think it started difficult because the country where this originated didn't tell us anything. And so our own health officials were making a lot of decisions without a lot of information. And that was difficult for them. And it seemed like this was going to be one of the, really very, very global pandemic that really injured a lot of people. And so we've tried, and I'll just tell you a little bit what we've done where I've been. We've tried very hard to follow the state and local mandates on the procedures that we need to do, because we wanted to make sure everybody was safe. And one of the things we saw early on in the data was that older people were more susceptible to this disease than others. And one of the other things that we saw was that people's opinions about this COVID pandemic varied as wide as about any issue I've ever dealt with. And so it's been very, very difficult to do that. For me personally, and in our school district, our board, we felt like in our part of Colorado, there weren't a lot of cases. In fact, in Dane County, where McLean School District is located, where I'm finishing up as superintendent, we had no cases months and months into the pandemic. And so we eventually got to the point where the board and I worked together to work with our local county officials to try to back off some of the regulations. And they didn't like that, but we advocated for that because we felt like it was best for our community. And then as it progressed further and further, CHASA regulations were very difficult to deal with at the high school level. And so in the process of all this, I did lobby. I talked to the commissioner. I talked to CHASA. I talked to kind of anybody who would listen and said, please don't make statewide mandates that require everyone to do the same thing. Please let the decisions be made at the local level based on local desires and local scientific data. Because I think that would have really been the best situation. I got to hear just a little bit of some of the comments on the last board meeting Zoom call about where you guys are in that process. And it is difficult to manage this because there's so many different opinions, and the government mandates have been pretty heavy. And so it's been difficult to manage that. But we have advocated for more local control so that we can make the decisions we want to make within our school. But it is one of those situations where we're dealing with a global pandemic. People aren't going to agree. But I strongly believe that everybody should be able to advocate for what they think is the best. And I think it's okay to have lots of different opinions. It's if you think about the whole classical way you educate, it's designed to do that. It's designed to teach our students how to have thoughtful, logical, spirited debate about things we don't agree on without it being personal. And our country could use a lot of that right now, I promise you. So I am very supportive of people expressing their opinions and advocating for what they think is best. Even when those come from 3 or 4 different perspectives, I think that's how we come to the best decision, the best agreement. And again, what I've done for my school where I'm at is advocate for local decision-making control rather than state or national. And I think that's would have been helpful in this whole process as well.
Sure. Mr. Holmes, how do you manage your role going between the board and their directives and working with administration to support that directive?
Well, it is one of those things that, oftentimes, boards are comprised of a number of different people that all represent different aspects of the community. And sometimes those boards even have challenges getting on the same page. And they can have spirited debate on things. And that's okay. One of the things that I see is challenging is when a board always agrees on everything without much discussion. It's like, okay, are they really working through the challenges and the issues, or are they just kind of going along? And I think that's really important. But one of the things that I've talked about, and this is something I try to build culture within my staff, is I think there's 3 things that are really important in any organization and how great organizations function. The first of those is we need to have respect for roles and authority. That's very, very important. The second of those is that we need to be servant leaders. Oftentimes if we're really thinking about what's best for the students, best for the families, then that will inform our decisions. One of my mentors in this whole education administration career has been Dr. Ron Blum. He's one of my reference letters. And one of the things he told me is, Merlin, if you can get the discussions down to what's best for kids, usually the solution presents itself pretty easily. He said, yeah, that's not always easy to do, to get everybody focused on what's best for kids. But the respect for roles and authority and the servant leadership aspects kind of balance each other. Does that make sense? I mean, we all kind of have somebody that we're under the authority of. Like the board is elected by the parents, so they're at some point under a parental authority. Your new COO will be under the direction of the board. That person will have some authority over your principals and staff. But at the same time, the board, the administration, should be thinking about how we serve our families and serve our students. So they both work together at the same time. And then the third piece of this that really makes it all work is the character of the people you're working with. Without good character, both of them, they just kind of fall apart. And so that character piece that you teach your students here at Monument Academy, where you're partnering with parents to teach them those things, is really an important piece of them being successful. And it's really important to have a successful organization to do that as well. So I do respect the board directive, and I know that, from what little I know, that the board listens to administration as well. There's some back and forth on things, but once the board makes that decision, we need to go forward with that decision. Does that make sense? So those three, the roles and responsibilities, respect for that, serving other people, and having character in that whole process makes it all good.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes, can you please rate your success in regards to communication with previous boards and parents?
I think part of when I came up with those three things I just talked about was frustration with it not being as successful in that role as I had hoped. I think it's one of the things that the average, I don't know if you understand this, but the average superintendent tenure in the United States and charter lead administrator, the average of those people in those positions is 2 to 3 years. And a part of that just has to do with someone who has 5, 6, 7 bosses all at the same time. And that makes communication very, very difficult. So I would say in the beginning of my career, there were some things I didn't do as well as I should have. And that's where I came up with those 3 things I talked about earlier. One of the things that I've implemented since then is doing things like weekly updates to the board to just make sure they understand what's going on, make sure that we're keeping them informed of things. I've kind of instituted what, and a lot of organizations have this. It's kind of the no surprises rule. It's something really big. People want to know about it ahead of time. And I have that same rule with teachers. Like if something big happens in the classroom, they let us know, before everybody in the community knows about it. We try to do that communication. So it's a real important piece. And I've learned during my time doing this to do it better, to be more proactive, to be more consistent with that. And that's helped with that process.
Mr. Holmes, the Douglas County News Press reported that you helped start both Castle Rock's Aspen View and Highlands Ranch Skyview Academies, but your contracts with both schools were terminated. In a Lone Tree Voice article, you were quoted as saying administrators and the board get to the point where they're not on the same page. At least one of those schools felt the need to terminate your contract immediately. Please speak to those circumstances and also share what you have learned that will help you work better in concert with the board at Monument Academy.
Well, I think in both those situations, one of the things that was unique in both of those is the founders of the school were also on board. And they were very invested in the day-to-day operations of the school. It's one of the things that attracted me to Monument Academy is that Monument Academy has been around for 20 years. And the founding board is not involved. And part of why that's important is founders, when they write the application, they recruit parents, they do everything, and sometimes they do it for several years. And it's really hard for them to let go and become a governing board and just govern the school. And you have policy governance procedures in place and things like that. And so one of the things that, it just was very difficult to get them to pull back from the day-to-day operations and let us do our job. But those schools were very, very successful. They both, have been highly decorated by CDE. The transition to new staff after me was smooth. The students continue to do great things. It's a difficult process to go through. And again, it's kind of that similar thing I talked to you about earlier. The average tenure of most term lead administrators just isn't very long. And that's why it's just you get to the point where you're not on the same page to make that transition. Like I said, I've learned some things to become a better administrator, and this school is much farther down that road than what those 2 schools were in the opening. And so hopefully I'll be here a long time if you guys do end up officially hiring me.
So, Mr. Holmes, I have several questions regarding your time at the Classical Academy. I was hoping that you could speak to us about your time there and the reason for your departure.
Now, these are usually the questions you get in the interview process, not the peer process. But,
You don't know our
one of the things that came up in the interview process here is that the principals really wanted to meet and talk. And I said, yeah, I understand what you're going through because I've been there. And that was the situation at the Classical Academy. The founders were very happy with what we were doing. The school was thriving. We went from, when I got there, the school was right in the middle. They just had middle school, and they were right in the middle of a pack of District 20 middle schools on their academic performance. 2 years later, we were the top performing high school and middle school academic performance of all the D20 schools for every single test, science, math, English, everything. And so that created a real fervor in the school, in the community that resulted in an 8,000 student wait list for the Classical Academy. And it's one of the things that in that process, the board there decided, after I'd been there about a year or so, that the person that I reported to would no longer be the only person reporting to the board. They decided that the elementary principal, myself, secondary principal, that person who operated kind of as a CFO type person, and then our instructional head, we would all four report to the board all the time. We begged them not to do that. We thought it was a recipe for disaster, and it was. It created a lot of, I guess, issues from the person who used to be in charge, and he felt like it was a demotion. And over time, they decided that they need to bring in a new person. They brought in a new person who eventually brought in a lot of his own people, and that was really kind of why he decided it was good for me to leave. I think history proved that he wanted his own people to run the school. But still have a lot of good connections at the Classical Academy. My wife worked there for how many years after? 9. She worked there for 9 years after I left. My son is their junior high athletic director. So we still have a lot of good connections there. A lot of people that do a great job. And so even though it was hard to leave in that process, it's just sometimes the people relationships are difficult. One of my favorite quotes to wrap it up, Harry Truman said, "It's amazing how much you can get done if no one cares who gets the credit." And that's one of the things I try to live by. I don't really care if I get the credit, teachers get the credit, parents get the credit. I just want the kids to do great and to learn. And I, one of the things I'm not very good at is sensing the politics of what's going on. I'm a lot better at telling people the truth than I am at telling them what they want to hear. And that's just the way I am. That's who I am. And I hear that's maybe a little bit sorry. And I'm okay with that, to be honest. It's okay. I'd rather hear a harsh opinion or criticism that's true, what you really think, than you to have 5 conversations with 6 other people that I don't know anything about. If that makes sense. So that's a little bit of who I am. But one of the things that you need to know is that everywhere I've been, the students have been really successful. And that's what matters to me.
Mr. Holmes, can you address your view on high turnover rates in administration, and how do you propose to keep this from being the case here at MA? And that's a rewording of a question that somebody sent in.
Yeah, I think the things I talked about earlier is really the key to that, is to thinking in terms of, we all operate in terms of, we have an authority that we report to. At the same time, most of the time we operate in servant leadership. We're thinking about how do we serve the teachers that are serving our students, and how do we make sure we know what the priorities are. And again, I think that's one of the things that you see in organizations that have long tenures of administration is you have a board that's really governing. You have administrators who are supporting their teachers and staff and really are kid focused. And then you have parents who are willing to, not hold back their opinions and express them honestly, but also look at overall how is the school doing for my child. And one of the things I've learned over time is, let's say there's 8 or 10 big things that Monument Academy has in its base score. Most of the families here probably only really love 7 to 8. But it's all a different 7 or 8. Does that make sense? It's like the thing you love the most might be something that someone goes, yeah, I can get rid of that, might be okay. Does that make sense? I mean, that's just how it works. There's probably very few families that say, every single thing about Monument Academy is perfect for our family. That probably, there's not very many of them, if we're honest with each other. But if we look at what is it producing for our children? Is it reinforcing the character we're trying to teach them? Are they getting good academics in math and English and writing? Are doors opening up for them to become the person that they want to be? If you look at it in that big picture, then it all works. So hopefully if we can do some of the things that I've talked about tonight, and you do make the decision to bring me on, that we can do some of those things.
Thank you. Handful more. Mr. Holmes, MA has a wonderful arts program, and our teachers in these fields are at a high level of excellence. Our concern is that while there is excellence in staff and students, we do not have a designated space for drama, choir, or band and orchestra to perform at the East Campus. They are currently in a gym with no elevated stage. It appears we could lose students because other high schools have better faculties. What are your thoughts on the arts and classical education, and do you see a need for designated performance space in order to grow as a high school?
Well, I do think that's a priority. Some of you might know, but my mom was a music teacher. She was a concert quality pianist, and she taught till she had kids, and then she used to sub in the school. So arts and music is one of my passions. Facilities do matter, but they're not the only thing that matter. And and I know there's a phase 2 building project that's supposed to happen at the East Campus, and hopefully that can be a part of it. I don't know what the specific plans are. I haven't gone that deep into things, but hopefully that can happen and be part of what we're doing. But I will tell you, at the Classical Academy, we had a lot of performances in a big gym. It was just the only big space we could afford to build. And so it got used for everything. And they developed a phenomenal choir program. Mrs. Carrie Spencer is one of the best choir teachers I've ever been around. And I plucked her out of 5th grade, begged her for 2 months to be a choir teacher, and she finally did. And against her own better judgment. But it's gone fantastic. But I think those programs, a lot of times, relationships are more important than facilities. We can get to the point where we have those facilities, but sometimes it takes time and money. Maybe part of that is finding a partner. Maybe part of that is finding some donors to create those facilities. But facilities are important, but relationships with staff are also very, very important to help create those excellent programs.
Mr. Holmes, how do you help teachers to implement lesson plans that are as engaging as possible for students? How do you help teachers to be passionate and excited about what they are teaching and not so focused on order and discipline at the expense of kids enjoying what they are learning?
Well, one of the programs that I mentioned before, and I do love it, it works really well, and you can Google it when you get home and find out more about it. It's called Capturing Kids' Hearts. And the beauty of that program is it gives teachers the tools they need to effectively manage without harshness or the opposite end of that, which is kids running across the tops of the desks. We've got to be focused so that we can do the things we need to do in the classroom. Capturing Kids' Heart is a great program for doing that. It gives them the tools to be good classroom managers. And let's be honest, even people who come through education programs at universities have very little training in how to effectively manage a classroom. It's just not part of the program. And so that's one of the things that I've done is help them understand how to effectively manage a classroom, how to correct kids in a way that makes sure they understand the behavior was not appropriate and not within the expectations of the classroom without demeaning the person as an individual. And that's a really key distinction in how I work with staff to manage classroom. I think that's really important that you address the behavior and rather than addressing them as a person. One of the rules that I communicate to staff is called the 95% rule. And it's that 95% of your students will do 95% of what you expect 95% of the time. It also means there are no perfect kids. Everybody makes mistakes, and everyone can grow. And even some of your most challenging students are going to have great days and mostly do what you want them to do. So it really is all about expectations and being consistent with those expectations. I think when you have a good culture in a school, and I know the culture here is really good already, so it's back to that good to great kind of mentality. When there's a good culture within a classroom, then it frees up the teacher to spend almost all their time instructing the lessons that they need to, building the skills of the students, and helping them achieve the things they want to achieve. So it's a very important piece of that. One of the other things that I think is really important for staff is to be very prepared. Planning is a huge piece of being really good teacher. If they walk in prepared, they're ready to start, they've got the lesson plan, they're moving and going and growing. And that is a very important piece of it. And then, part of it is, I think my role as kind of the head of an organization is to be the head cheerleader. One of my favorite movies is The Rookie, the baseball movie. Anybody seen that movie? Well, there's a point where an old guy, he's not as old as me, he's an old guy. He finally gets to realize his dream of playing professional baseball, but he's in the minors. And he's getting frustrated. He has a conversation with his wife, who's 1,000 miles away. And it finally dawns on him that he's getting to do what he loves. And he walks in the locker room the next day, and there's a young guy that's complaining about this, that, and the other thing. He goes, "Hey, we get to play baseball. We get to play baseball today." And that's the way I approach working in school. I love the education process. And good teachers I know, they all love it too. And we just need to remind each other, teaching's a hard job. It takes a lot of talent. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes perseverance. It takes a lot. You have to give a lot of yourself. But we need to encourage each other and remind each other that, hey, we get to work with kids today. We get to teach kids and do that today. And then we take a couple months off in the summer to recharge your batteries because we need them, right? So.
Mr. Holmes, MA's special education population makes up nearly 8% of the school. How do you view a COO's role at supporting the ESS department?
Part of what I didn't mention when I talked about our kids is that our oldest has profound hearing loss and has some pretty significant learning difficulties. And then the next four were all boys, and they're all in the top 10%. Learning came really easy for them. So one of the things we learned as parents early on was that different kids need different supports to do their best. And that's a really important piece of making sure that each child can be successful. I've always supported our special education departments and made sure that they had the things they needed to be successful and to help those kids move forward. And part of what makes that whole process very challenging is that you do write individualized education plans for each student. Each student is different. Each student has different needs, even if they have some of the same labels for their disability. What works for them might be different than what works for other students. So it's important to understand that individualized plan for each student needs to be carried out in a way that supports them, but in a way that's doable for the school as well, and to support that whole process and make sure that every student that's part of the school gets a chance to be successful and to grow and learn.
Mr. Holmes, what ideas do you have for starting more sports in high school? For example, football, basketball, cheer. What is a timeline for rolling these out and a time needed if, I'll add on to this, if you were hired as a COO?
Now, if we're fortunate enough to get to work together, this is the situation that I've been through a few times before. One of the things that you need to gauge is, I'll just tick through some of the things. Do you have the facilities, or can you use facilities? Do you have somebody on staff who is passionate about that sport and can help coach that sport, or a parent that can partner with them? One of the best ways to start clubs and other activities is to have one staff member, one parent that are passionate about something, and they can usually recruit a group of kids and get something off the ground. So part of it is there enough student interest? Is the school big enough to support another activity, another sport? Do we have facilities? Is there budget to do that? And then how will it affect other activities that we already have in place? Those are some of the key questions that we've asked. And we've built, as the school grows, the number of activities and athletics that you can offer will grow and continue to grow. Me personally, I don't have a set timeline for what sport ought to happen when, or which should be a priority. Those priorities really come from the students and from the community. So one of the things we have done in other schools is do surveys of the students. What sports do you want to see happen here at the school? Parents, what activities do you feel would be important for our community? And then base a lot of those decisions then on, because you have to have interest. If you say, well, we're going to start X, Y, or Z program, and there's almost no student interest and very little parent support, it's probably not going to be successful. One of the first sports we started at the Classical Academy was cross country. We had a good program that would feed into it. Land Sharks was created by some TCOs, the board of directors. And so it was a ready-made feeder program to start cross country. We had a very passionate individual who wanted to be cross-country coach, Alan Versaw, and we had kids who were willing to do it and wanted to participate. And then you have multiple state championships that result in that. So not does every program work that way. It was a very unique situation, but those are some of the criteria that if I'm hired as your COO, I would use to decide to help the community decide what activities, what sports would be added as we grow.
Mr. Holmes, one final question, and then give you an opportunity for some closing comments. You've already touched a little bit on this question, but I'll ask it again. How will you build trust with staff and parents based on your previous positions?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm pretty good at being honest about what I think and what I really think. And I really appreciate when other people do that too. And I hope that if I'm hired as your COO, we can build that trust. A trust based on honesty and truth and real conversations about things. I think that's the way it works long term and the way it works best. So part of what the emphasis of on the academy is high character. We want to help partner with parents develop the character inside the students. One of the very, very best ways to do that is for staff, parents, community members that are involved to model that for our students and demonstrate this is what good character looks like. And I think that's how we build trust. It's that honesty, that communication, and then being who we are, working together to solve problems and create a way.
If you want to give any closing
Okay.
comments, so that's all I have for questions, sir.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate that. And, if you're willing, just come up and shake hands. I've had the antigen test, so I've had COVID at some point, although I didn't really get sick, so I don't. But I'm immune, so if you want to shake hands on it, if you want to elbow bump, that's fine. If you want to say hi from 10 feet away, that's fine too. But please come up and and talk, chat a little bit more, and we have to be out of here. So,
What time does the alarm go off?
I think it's 10,
10.
oh,
so we're fine.
So
Yeah.
I've gotta be out by 9:30.
8:05 is fine too.
Yeah, of course. That's 3 hours, so I think we're okay.
Let's shoot for 7:30. You guys have 30 minutes, okay? How's that? Feel good with that? 7:30 it is. Okay, you got 30 minutes.
Well, I just want to just say that if, if I'm ultimately selected to be the new COO, it's an honor and a privilege. Like I said, we lived in Monument since 2003, and we've watched this school from the sidelines, I guess, is the best way to put it. And we'd love to be involved in the school. And part of it just feels like it's in my wheelhouse. One of the people that I read books from is Marcus Buckingham. He talks about strengths and people doing what they're really good at. And this is where my wheelhouse, my strength zone is helping schools grow into a really great high school. And I hope I get that opportunity to do that with all of you. And I do look at it as doing with you. That's part of who I am, how I do this. Thank you.
Awesome, I think that's it for now. If you guys want to say hi to Mr. Holmes, you're more than welcome to. Thank you, everybody, for coming. As always, I love our awesome community and our awesome teachers and the engagement that you guys always provide. So here he is. Adam.
Melanie.
No, you were during the meeting.
Oh, hold on, I gotta officially adjourn. Christiana, thank you for coming as well. It is now 7:02 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
That was it.